Good day, everyone. Dr. Judy here for our part one of essentially our four-part series around managing moots and other stressful but meaningful things. If you haven't checked out the introductory video, go ahead and watch that before joining us here. It is a 30 to 40-minute video overviewing an introduction to why we're gathering here together, what I'm teaching you and why, as well as giving you a good solid introduction to the nervous system and how to harness the power of our thoughts and our emotions so they can work together and help us to think like a lawyer. In this part, I'm going to cover in about 15 to 20 minutes, high energy, high stakes, and what it means to manage stress and emotions specifically. Some of this content in this part one might be repetitive if you've heard me speak about the basics of understanding stress and emotions and checking in with the self, but it also is a great refresher, even if you have, for us to gather and just set the stage for the next few components. So I'd like to take you back before I jump into this session to where I ended in the previous session around getting you to draw out a 3 chart and list some of your strengths or core components about who you are in terms of, these are qualities you possess, these might be qualities you possess, and these are qualities maybe you don't yet possess. Now, the reason why I asked you to do this is because I'm going to ask you to call upon these strengths that are on your list in times of difficulty. So whenever you find yourself thinking, I can't do this, which you might find at any point in the mooting process as you're preparing or you're grappling with concepts with a partner or a small group, or even when you're practicing or up in front of your teams and your people. Sometimes we say things to ourselves like, I can't do this. We subscribe to a self-defeating monologue in our head, a story in our head. Like I said in the previous version or introduction, Brene Brown calls that the shitty first draft. We want to be able to toss that and edit that thought with an I can, right? And that's a mindset thing. That's a shift that I learned about through Carol Dweck's work and research around mindset. And how this can help us is we can go back to this list and use these qualities to remind ourselves about what our strengths are. And that can convince us when we're stuck that we actually can do what we are initially believing is too difficult for us to tackle. So if I'm saying to myself, I can't do this, it's too hard, I'm going to go back to my list. And I'm going to say, actually, yes, I can, because I'm strong, because I'm patient, because I'm kind, because I'm smart, because I'm brave. Any of the words that I've ascribed, especially to I know I am, that column where I know for sure I am these things, I want to call on those words when I'm having stress and difficulty. So I just wanted to remind you about this. And if you haven't watched the introduction, go back and watch it. It ends with this list. I invite you to participate in that activity. And if you believe it all in mantras or repeating positive things that are going to support you, there's a lot of research around when we talk the talk in our mind, we can walk the walk because our brains map for that. If you're experiencing any negativity, put some of these positive attributes up around your space and just generally remind yourself as often as you can how awesome you are. And beyond that, the skills that you possess that are going to help get you through this. All right. So on that note, we're going to move into talking about what today's part one is all about. High stakes, high energy, managing meaningful but stressful things. This is hugely important because when we step into a career or step into a transition in life, it's hard, it's stressful, and it's difficult. And it also offers opportunity and growth. So I want you to be able to recognize both things as true in this experience. Yes, it's maybe difficult work, and it's something you love or you enjoy or you're going to benefit from in your future. So the first thing I want you to remember in this process is going back to the notion of a human curriculum. We need each other. There is going to be no more powerful force than the interaction, the partnership, the relationship you have with the people you're working with in this endeavor. And then there's going to be no more powerful force than the connections that you all have together when you're in the space participating in the moot experience. So people are always watching what we're doing, and they are absorbing, for better or for worse, the energy that we carry into a space. Our bodies neurophysiologically code that information on a subconscious, unconscious level. So when I'm in the room with someone who is in high stress or high struggle, then my body is going to automatically pick up on that and mirror that, because human energies are meant to match. They're meant to match so that we can show up for and support each other. And they're meant to match so that we can be on guard in fight, flight states, if needed, to help each other. So we're wired to protect ourselves and others, and we're wired to connect with ourselves and others. And if you can use some of the things we talked about in the previous introductory video and this video on stress and stress management to support your nervous system to be calm, you're automatically going to contribute to the calming of other nervous systems in the room. This is a powerful force that we can harness and use to our advantage when we practice techniques and recognize that they can show up for us and be there for us during times of difficulty. So I hope that you see that this is a human endeavor, and it's a worthwhile endeavor for the sake of yourself and those who you work with and support. So let's launch into talking about stress. Really redundant question here. Does anyone have stress? Chances are you're sitting behind the screen, nodding your head. Absolutely. Who doesn't have stress? And you're 100% correct. If you're human, you have stress. It's the nature of being on this planet today or any day in history. When was life ever not stressful? What's important about stress is understanding how we cope with, manage, deal with it, not that it just exists. We have to admit that we have stress in our lives, but what's different about us as humans is that we all cope with stress in different ways. So I break this down to the sawtooth, the roller coaster, riding the waves, or flat line. And one of these is a healthy, adaptive way to deal with stress, and the other three, not so much. So let's describe them and see where you might fall. So I'll just bring them all up here for the sake of having some images on the screen. The sawtooth is me bouncing around depending on whether or not stress is high or low in my life. So a sawtooth pattern, a person who responds to stress with this pattern is going to feel good, bad, good, bad, good, bad, and they bounce through life only feeling one of those two ways, depending on the events that are happening around them. When good things are happening, they feel good. When bad things are happening or high stress, they feel bad. And what's important to understand here is that the stress in my environment is in charge. I'm not in charge. So this isn't a healthy place to be, because we want to be able to roll with the motions of stress and have some control of how we get through that. We shouldn't be ping-ponging to extreme highs or extreme lows. It's just not healthy. Now, if you recognize yourself in this pattern, that's okay. All you want to do is pay attention to some of the ways that I teach you to kind of squish that up a little bit so that we can be kind of rolling through stress versus ping-ponging up and down through the highs and lows of life. The second kind of person or way to roll through stress is the roller coaster. Now, this is me when I'm blown around by my stress and I don't know if I'm coming or going. I'm turned inside out and upside down, and I'm all over the place. I'm completely out of control. Stress is blowing me around. And if I recognize that I'm in that place in life, that's the first step at being able to do things a little bit differently. Again, riding the waves is where we want to be. We want to be able to roll through stress like we're on a bit of a surfboard, and we're using stress to our advantage, and we're riding through when it's low, but we know it's going to come back up and we're going to be okay. And we're kind of in charge of that. So if you notice that you're blown around by stress, you get easily turned inside out, that life becomes chaotic really quickly with stress, that's a point of awareness for learning how to name it to tame it when it comes to stressful emotions and stressful experiences, and have a better experience of life. The last way is the flat line, and that just, it is what it is. When we are so stressed out, we don't know what to do, that freeze mechanism can take over and we just fall flat. This is someone who is completely either disassociated from life and things that are going on, or they are in so much avoidance that, things are piling up and stress is over here and it's mounting and it's looming and it might be big, but I'm hiding over here in a corner, ignoring it. So we don't want to be in this state, because we know that stress that isn't dealt with is only going to pile up. It's not really going to go away. So I'll just reiterate that when it comes to stress, it's inevitable, number one, and we can learn to cope and manage it, AKA ride the waves of stress that comes and goes. And that's the important piece to that second component, is that stress will come and it will go. We'll go through those periods in life where we have stress, more stress, and we have less stress. And we can also encourage stress in our body to move along by taking actions that help us to complete a stress response cycle. So stress is meant to come in and it's meant to be released. We release stress by getting outside in the sun, spending time with friends, exercising, sleeping, eating well. All those things we know about help us to release stress. When we don't do them, stress can just find a place in the body and it hangs out there. And we know through a lot of trauma work, especially, but psychologists and psychiatrists who do work around stress, distress, and trauma, they tell us the body keeps the score, right? That's Bessel van der Kolk's work. So if we don't help stress move along, just ride the waves on out of our life, then it'll find a place to go in the body and will eventually become very sick, because stress can be toxic. So I hope you have a good framing understanding of stress. We're going to kind of move into learning about coping with stress and paying attention to how we're doing with stress. And then this video will wrap it up nicely with that good baseline understanding for you to move into the rest of the video series. So coping is the difference between mental illness and mental wellness. At a fundamental level, if I'm coping with life and managing stress, I should be relatively well. If I'm not, that leaves me susceptible to mental illness. We know from the literature and research around mental illness, the Canadian Mental Health Association, as well as other organizations, share a lot of research and data on mental health. One of the facts is that by middle age, half of us has experienced, a major mental health crisis in our life, 50%. So that means that any one of us, ill or well, family history or not, is susceptible to mental illness. Now, what I like to do is speak on our control around mental wellness to combat or manage these stressful events that can tip the scales for us into either having to deal with or manage a mental illness. So I'm going to bring up a little bit of information around mental health and then speak to that and share some components for you that are conducive to ill or well health. So mental health is greatly impacted by our ability to cope and manage emotions. Learning to cope is part of the human condition. We're not born knowing how to cope. As babies, we cry and we hope that our needs are met. And sometimes they are, sometimes they're not. Eventually, we meet an age and stage in life where we're in charge of coping, but we're not always taught about how to do that. And that's what I'm here to help you with. So learning to cope is a part of the human condition. You can learn to cope with your stress and therefore support your susceptibility to mental illness. And coping builds strength and resilience. So the more we cope, the more our bodies learn that it's okay, we can handle stress, We're meant for this, and we will survive and we will get through it. We can learn to cope and move from ill to well, whether that's an ill feeling or an ill sensation or even a mental illness diagnosis. We can learn to use coping strategies to move from ill to well alone, on our own, or with help from other people. And that's where therapists, family members, friends, community come into play. We might not be able to do it on our own. And if you feel at all like you're struggling and these videos and any support you're receiving in your circle isn't enough, come and speak to me or another mental health practitioner or your doctor, and you can receive some support because we can't always do it alone. At any point in life, we may come to a time where the strategies that we've always used just aren't enough. And that's where someone like me can help you. So I invite you to reach out to me if you're trying all of the strategies that I'm sharing with you in this mini series and they're just not helping, they're just not working. You might need a little bit extra. So on that note, I'm going to bring up, this is just showing, actually, I'm going to stop here for a second before I bring that up and just show you and speak to this continuum. What I want to share with you is that when we are on the side of feeling like ill health is creeping in, we're not managing, stress is mounting, that experience of mental illness or mental stress is from a lack of skills and supports. When we are able to access skills and supports, we have a lot of power over bringing us from illness to wellness. And so I just wanted to reinforce that you should be able to use a lot of these skills and strategies and support your well-being. Again, if you can't and you feel like you need help, reach out, because there are people like me who can support you to access all of the skills and all of the wellness resources that you need in order to be well. So what are the things that contribute to mental illness or mental wellness? They're everyday things. Things like time management and organization, decision-making skills, ethics, values. These can all weigh on us very heavily. Personal accountability, responsibility. All of us have things going on in our lives. And if we're not sure how to juggle it all, it can become very stressful. The amount of risk that we take on in our life, whether or not we have healthy or maladaptive coping strategies, our general level of happiness. Are we the kind of person who feels like we're satisfied in life and we're thriving on a regular basis, or do we have more malaise? That really speaks to how we go about the world. Some of us are Eeyores. If you're thinking of Winnie the Pooh, I always go back to that show because it had such a great, or those stories had such great characters that embodied some of these ways in which we go about the world. And some of us go about the world as a Tigger or a Winnie the Pooh, or some of us are more like Piglet and Eeyore, where there's always something to worry about or there's always something wrong. So those are important things to think about. Whether or not we have self-care, who is supporting us, our ability to maintain healthy boundaries, some of our personality features, like how we manage mistakes, or if we're setting ourselves up for perfectionism, how we manage relationships, problem-solving skills. All of these components, these bubbles, exist in our lives, and they contribute to stress or ill health if we're not able to cope with or manage them. So again, I'm going to teach you about some things you can do all throughout this series to cope and manage with stress. We're going to do it through knowledge, right? That's the aware. We're going to do it through self-care strategies and caregiving support strategies. That's the care. And we're going to do it through understanding coping, how to use these things in periods of high stress to cope. I always start this conversation with temperature and stress level. So this is checking in with the self and knowing how I'm doing. I'll go through this relatively quickly because most of you are familiar with this from my talk at the beginning of the year. Our temperature is our mood from 1 to 10. Our stress is our stress level from 1 to 10. And I have people check in with themselves so that they can, number one, understand that emotions are a non-negotiable part of life. This is who we are as human beings. And that if we know if we're checking in with ourselves and we have some understanding of our baseline, we know when to apply strategies and when to reach out for help. And this is where this scale of, the thriver mindset would help us to be at the top end. If we're doing all kinds of things in our life to support wellness and we're checking in and we're kind of living in this zone, then we're doing okay. But what I want you to be aware of as a human is when you slip, your baseline changes. It's not regularly in the surviving and thriving zone. If it dips down to a struggling or suffering zone, I want you to know at what point you need to apply self-care, because we are so apt as human beings to say self-care, self-schmare. I don't have time for this. I want you to know, when do I have to make time for self-care? This is so important, especially during stressful times, because if I don't make time for self-care, or if I'm not reaching out to people who can help me in these moments that are related to tipping points, I might slip down to struggling or suffering. And that's when I'm going to have a level of dysregulation in my body that is disordered, that is unhealthy. And in order to cope and manage with stress in life, I have to know what my tipping point is. And I've got to reach out to others or apply strategies for myself to just stop and take some care in order to be able to cope and manage and go forward. So a couple of questions you could reflect on here before we go is, how do you cope and manage with intense emotions? I invite you to journal about that so you're aware of the strategies you already have, and then maybe ones that you need more support with. Who do you reach out to for help when you can't manage? It's really good to have those lists of like your top 5 people. And how do you know when to reach out? What are the signs in your body? What are the thoughts in your mind when it's time to reach out for help? Become familiar with that. Get to know yourself so you know what you need. This is the last component here before part 1 is finished. I just want to remind you that when a human being reaches a state of burnout, it's because that is a symptom of not coping and managing with the stress of our profession or our life or our role. So actively knowing and responding wisely to our needs, AKA stress in our life, is going to help to keep us in this zone of satisfaction with our job. You will be launching into a career for which you're called upon to help others in times of need. Lawyers do that, doctors, nurses, teachers. There's many of us in the world who fulfill these helper or caregiver roles. That means it's easy for us to fall into what's known as compassion fatigue, vicarious trauma from the stress of our clients, and burnout. In order to avoid getting through there, learning to cope with and manage your stress is going to be your best friend, your best strategy to maintaining wellness. So in the next couple of parts to this mini series, we're going to talk about mooting specifically and taking some of these things further. We're going to learn about just how far we can go to care for ourselves and others when we start with the self first. All right, take care. Thanks for spending time with me for part 1. We'll see you in the next video.